I'd like to introduce Cindy from the United States, who takes LDN for Hailey-Hailey Disease, fibromyalgia, and chronic fatigue syndrome. Thank you for joining me, Cindy.
Oh, you're welcome.
Could you tell me when you first started to experience these symptoms?
Well, the Hailey-Hailey disease, I had a major outbreak about 20 years ago, and then it was pretty much in remission until 2009. The fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome I've had for 35 to 40 years.
Mm-hmm. And were you giving anything back then for the fibromyalgia and the chronic fatigue?
No. In fact, back then they didn't even have a diagnosis for it. They just said it was all in your head back then.
Well, that's helpful, isn't it?
Yeah, really. Not very.
No. So when you developed Hailey-Hailey's disease, was there anything they could give you to help with that?
Well, they ended up putting me on antivirals and using a topical steroid cream. At first they thought I had shingles, and they weren't really sure exactly what had triggered it. That was the episode 20 years ago. Then when I had the episode in 2009, they thought it was poison ivy, and they put me on oral steroids, but it didn't heal the problem. It just continued to spread across my body.
Mm-hmm. And did the Hailey-Hailey's, with the pain with that and from the fibromyalgia, increase?
Well, the Hailey-Hailey, there was a lot of pain when it spread across my body. What has happened to me with Hailey-Hailey is different than some of the other sufferers in that I get a blister, and from the blister I can then develop a secondary viral infection, which is like a herpes simplex, which can spread very rapidly across my body. And if that's not gotten under control quickly, it feels like a severe case of poison ivy and a burning. The fibromyalgia, I was just in intense chronic pain all the time.
Mm-hmm. So before you found LDN, what would you say your pain levels were like on a score of 1 to 10, 10 being the worst, on a bad day?
Oh, gosh, 7 to 8, really, for the fibromyalgia.
Mm-hmm. And what about
on a bad day?
On a good day?
Well, they were all bad days, really. I'm someone who has it all the time. I didn't have episodes of remission, really.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How did you hear about LDN?
I heard about it on our Facebook Hailey-Hailey Disease site. We have a worldwide support group, and one of the members had the idea that it might help Hailey-Hailey.
Mm-hmm. And how did you go about getting a prescription?
Well, I kept asking my doctors. I asked my dermatologist, and he wasn't particularly interested, and I asked my primary care doctor, and she wasn't very interested, and I finally found a new, young primary care physician, and he had read an article about LDN in a journal about a year prior, and he remembered that there weren't side effects, and he was very open to it, so he prescribed it to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's very reassuring, having a doctor that thinks outside of the box.
Well, and the other thing I'll say about him that was so surprising is that he was a new doctor. I did not have a relationship with him, and he was still willing to go ahead and prescribe it, which I found very encouraging because he was that open to it. I think especially as a younger doctor.
Yes. When you first started, did you notice any introductory side effects?
I had a little bit of the herxing on and off. I felt like I had the flu at various times when I would try to increase my dose. I started on a low dose, and as I would increase, it was almost like I was having this cleaning out effect, and I felt flu-like, so I would cut my dose back. So I'm one of those people that had to increase it very, very slowly.
Mm-hmm. And what did you notice initially when you first started taking LDN, improvements-wise?
Well, the first thing I noticed was what I considered almost miraculous. On the third night, my trigger points, which are fibromyalgia trigger points that are just so tight and miserable in my shoulder, neck area, started to loosen up. And I just couldn't believe it, because I had taken all kinds of medications over the years and had trigger point injections at a pain clinic and everything, and nothing except the trigger point injections, which are like an anesthetic. That was the only thing that would ever open it up like that. And the LDN on the third night opened it up, and so it was just amazing. And the Hailey-Hailey, it was more gradual. I just noticed my skin just sort of gradually clearing up.
Mm-hmm. And how long have you been taking LDN now?
For several months, maybe 6 or 7 months.
Mm-hmm. And have you had any further outbreaks on your Hailey-Haileys?
I have small ones, but the thing that I've noticed is they seem to get under control much more quickly. I will say that Hailey-Hailey is a genetic disorder, and my father had it. And unfortunately, my father died when he was 60 years old. And I remember that he suffered more in his later years in life. So I'm 56 now, and it seems like my Hailey-Hailey has been getting worse the last few years. So it's hard to exactly say how much improvement I've had, because I think without the LDN, my Hailey-Hailey was on the path to continually get worse and worse and worse. So I'm happy if I just keep it under like a mild control, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say your pain levels are now on a bad day?
With the fibromyalgia, I would say it's more like on a bad day, more 5 to 6. Mm-hmm. It's definitely much more manageable, and it's just not so overwhelmingly horrific.
You said before that every day was a bad day. Do you get any good days now?
That's tough, because I still have really severe problems with the chronic fatigue syndrome. I haven't had as much of a pickup from the LDN with the chronic fatigue syndrome as I had hoped. So I don't ever have really great days, but I will say that I think the LDN has helped my outlook on life, and I feel a little more positive and a little more upbeat. So even on the bad days, I don't feel quite as down or as blue.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good. I mean, there are doctors that prescribe LDN for depression. That really helps lighten the mood, like you were saying. So that's quite promising as well. What would you like to say to other people who are contemplating trying LDN for either chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, or Hailey-Hailey disease?
That I really wish they would give it a try, and that even if they have to go very slowly and start on a very low dose, that it's worth it. It was really worth going through the initial herxing and the kind of the cleaning out that I did. It's definitely been worth sticking with, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. And it's so much more effective than so many of the medications out there that cause such side effects. I would encourage everyone to try it. And I have had a number of friends with all kinds of other ailments that have decided to try it, and they're all having good success for many disorders now.
Mm-hmm. Do you take anything else for your Hailey-Hailey disease or fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue?
Well, for the Hailey-Hailey, when I get the initial blisters now, if it's severe enough, I use a little bit of a topical steroid cream, and I will take an antiviral so that I don't have the chance of it spreading rapidly. For the fibromyalgia, no, I don't really take anything, and the chronic fatigue syndrome, there's not too much to take either. So there aren't a lot of medicines for these things that I find effective.
Mhm. Well, that's a very positive story. Thank you very much for sharing it with us.
Well, Linda, I want to thank you for your interest in Hailey-Hailey disease, because it's such a rare disease that there aren't a lot of people that are interested in hearing about it or researching it. So on behalf of all the other sufferers, I really want to thank you.
You're welcome.